I'm so sick of love stories and their fake happy endings. Hi, I'm Wendy, and this is my story. I didn't imagine I would be one of those fail stories. Well, what we can do now. All started that day I met Andy like it was yesterday. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, and I was at a coffee shop downtown, sipping on a pumpkin spice latte, my guilty pleasure. He walked in, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, his tie slightly loosened as if he had a long day. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and our eyes met briefly when he turned around. There was something about the way he carried himself, confident yet approachable. He smiled at me, and I felt my cheeks flush. We started talking, and before I knew it, 2 hours had flown by. He told me about his work in tech security, and I shared my dream of starting my own candle business. There was an instant connection, a spark that neither of us could ignore. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other almost every day. Andy was different from anyone I'd ever met. He was thoughtful, always remembering the little things I liked, my favorite flowers, the way I took my coffee, the books I loved. He had this quiet strength about him, a steadiness that made me feel safe. One evening, after a romantic dinner at a little Italian restaurant, he took my hand and told me he was falling in love with me. I felt the same way, and I told him so. That night, under the glow of the city lights, we shared our first kiss. It was soft, tender, and filled with promise. Our relationship moved quickly after that. Andy was my rock, my partner in every sense of the word. We spent weekends exploring the city, cooking together, and talking about our future. He supported my candle business from the start, even helping me set up my first website. I, in turn, encouraged him in his career, listening to his work stories and celebrating his successes. It wasn't long before we started talking about marriage. One evening, during a sunset walk on the beach, Andy got down on one knee and asked me to be his wife. I said yes, without hesitation, tears streaming down my face. Our wedding was small, but perfect. We exchanged vows in a garden, surrounded by our closest friends and family. I wore a simple white dress, and Andy looked dashing in his suit. As we danced under the stars that night, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. We were starting a new chapter together, and I couldn't wait to see where life would take us. Little did I know, our journey would be filled with both joy and heartache. The first few years of our marriage were a whirlwind of love and adventure. Andy's career was thriving, and my candle business was slowly gaining traction. We bought a cozy house in the suburbs, complete with a backyard where we imagined our future children playing. Life felt like a dream, and I was grateful for every moment. Andy was my best friend, my confidant, and my biggest supporter. We made a great team, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses. When I found out I was pregnant, we were over the moon. Andy was so excited to be a father, and I could already picture him holding our baby in his arms. The pregnancy was smooth, and 9 months later, we welcomed our son, Larry, into the world. Holding him for the first time was the most profound moment of my life. Andy was by my side, tears in his eyes, as we marveled at the tiny life we had created together. In that moment, I felt complete. Being parents brought us even closer. Andy was a hands-on dad, changing diapers, rocking Larry to sleep, and even taking night shifts so I could rest. We were a unit, a family, and I couldn't have been happier. But as the years went by, the demands of life started to creep in. Andy's job became more demanding, and my days were filled with taking care of Larry and managing my business. We were still happy, but the carefree days of our early marriage began to fade. Despite the challenges, we made it work. We had date nights, family vacations, and moments of pure joy that reminded me why I fell in love with Andy in the first place. But as Larry grew older and more independent, I started to feel a shift in our relationship. Andy was often buried in work, and I found myself spending more time alone. It was subtle at first, but over time, the distance between us grew. I didn't realize it then, but our lives were about to change in ways I never could have imagined.
Thank you for watching Gaby's cheating stories. Please subscribe. It just take 1 second. Thank you.
By the time Larry turned 15, our lives had settled into a comfortable routine. Andy was climbing the corporate ladder, and my candle business had become a steady source of income. Larry was thriving in high school, and I was proud of the young man he was becoming. But beneath the surface, cracks were starting to form in my marriage. Andy was working longer hours, often coming home late and exhausted. Our conversations became superficial, and the intimacy we once shared began to fade. I tried to bridge the gap, suggesting date nights and weekend getaways, but Andy was always too busy. I told myself it was just a phase, that things would get better once his workload eased. But deep down, I felt lonely. I missed the connection we used to have, the way he used to look at me like I was the only woman in the world. I poured my energy into Larry and my business, but it wasn't enough to fill the void. One evening, after another long day of work, Andy came home with news that would change everything. He had been promoted to a senior position, which meant more responsibility and even longer hours. I tried to be supportive, but inside, I felt a pang of disappointment. I knew what this meant for us: less time together, more distance. That night, as I lay in bed next to Andy, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were drifting apart. I wanted to talk to him, to tell him how I was feeling, but I didn't know where to start. The promotion marked a turning point in our marriage. Andy's absence became more pronounced, and I found myself spending more time with Larry and his friends. It was during this time that I met Troy, Larry's best friend. At first, he was just another teenager hanging out at our house, but there was something different about him. He was older than the other kids, more mature, and he had a way of making me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. Little did I know, meeting Troy would set off a chain of events that would change my life forever. With Andy working late most nights, Larry and I developed a closer bond. He was at that age where he needed guidance, but also wanted his independence. I tried to be there for him, to listen when he needed to talk, and give him space when he didn't. It wasn't always easy, but I loved being his mom. Around this time, Troy started coming over more often. He was a good influence on Larry, responsible, respectful, and always willing to lend a hand. I appreciated having him around, especially when Andy wasn't home. Troy was different from the other boys. He had a quiet confidence about him, and he carried himself like someone much older than his years. He was 18, just a few years older than Larry, but he seemed to have a maturity that set him apart. He was polite, well-spoken, and always made an effort to include me in their conversations. At first, I thought it was just his way of being friendly, but over time, I started to notice the way he looked at me, like he saw me as more than just Larry's mom. One evening, after a long day of work, I came home to find Larry alone in the kitchen. We continued talking, and I could feel a shift in the air. There was a tension between us, something unspoken but undeniable. Troy leaned in closer, his eyes locking with mine, and before I knew it, we were kissing. It was impulsive, reckless, and completely out of character for me. But in that moment, I didn't care. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, and I didn't want it to end. That first kiss with Troy was like a spark igniting a fire I didn't know was still burning inside me. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help myself. There was something about the way he made me feel desired, appreciated, seen. It was a stark contrast to the cold distance that had crept into my marriage. Over the next few weeks, Troy and I found ways to be alone together. It started with innocent conversations, but it quickly escalated into something more. We were careful, always making sure Larry and Andy didn't suspect anything. Troy would come over to hang out with Larry, and when the opportunity arose, we would steal moments together, a touch, a kiss, a whispered promise. It was thrilling and terrifying all at once. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living, not just going through the motions. One night, after Larry had gone to bed and Andy was asleep, Troy called me. He was outside in his car, and without thinking, I slipped out of the house and joined him. We drove to a secluded spot, and there, in the back seat of his car, we crossed a line I never thought I would cross. It was passionate, intense, and completely reckless. I knew I was risking everything, my marriage, my family, my reputation, but in that moment, none of it mattered. All I cared about was the way Troy made me feel. The next morning, I woke up filled with guilt and shame. I couldn't believe what I had done, but at the same time, I couldn't bring myself to regret it. Troy had awakened something in me that I thought was gone forever, and I wasn't ready to let that go. I told myself it was just a fling, something that would fizzle out on its own. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I was in too deep, and there was no turning back. As the weeks turned into months, my affair with Troy became more intense. We found ways to be together, sneaking around like teenagers. It was exhilarating and exhausting all at once. I was living a double life, pretending everything was normal at home, secretly meeting Troy whenever I could. I told myself I was being careful. Looking back, I know I was reckless. I was so caught up in the passion and excitement that I didn't stop to think about the consequences. Andy, meanwhile, was completely oblivious. He was so focused on work that he didn't notice the changes in me, the late nights, the secret phone calls, the distance between us. I felt guilty, but I also felt justified. Andy had been neglecting me for years, and Troy was giving me the attention and affection I craved. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. Troy listened to me, made me feel valued, and reminded me of the woman I used to be. Larry, of course, had no idea what was going on. He was happy to have Troy around, and I convinced myself that as long as he didn't find out, no one would get hurt. But the truth was, I was hurting everyone, myself included. I was living a lie, and it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. Still, I couldn't bring myself to end it. I was addicted to the way Troy made me feel, and I wasn't ready to let that go. The affair became a part of my life, a secret I carried with me every day. I told myself I was in control, but deep down, I knew I was spiraling. I was risking everything, my marriage, my family, my future, for a relationship that had no future. But in the moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the way Troy looked at me, the way he made me feel alive. I was living in a fantasy, and I didn't want it to end. The cracks in my double life started to show one fateful evening. Andy had been working late, as usual, and Larry was out with friends. Troy came over, and we spent the evening together, lost in our own little world. But as the night wore on, I started to feel uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that we were pushing our luck. I tried to push the thoughts aside, but they lingered in the back of my mind. The next morning, Andy came home early. He looked tired, but there was something else in his eyes, a suspicion, a doubt. He asked me where I had been the night before, and I froze. I had told him I was at a friend's house, but I could tell he didn't believe me. I tried to play it cool, but inside, I was panicking. I knew I had to be more careful, but it was getting harder to keep up the show. Over the next few weeks, Andy started paying more attention to me. He would ask questions, check my phone, and even show up unexpectedly at home. I could feel the walls closing in, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep the secret. Troy, meanwhile, was becoming more possessive. He wanted more of my time, more of my attention, and I was struggling to balance everything. I was living on the edge, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. One night, after a particularly tense argument with Andy, I broke down. I realized I couldn't keep living like this, lying to everyone I loved. I knew I had to make a choice, either end the affair and try to salvage my marriage or risk losing everything. But even as I thought about it, I knew the decision wasn't that simple. I was in too deep, and I didn't know if I could walk away. The guilt was eating me alive, but so was the fear of losing Troy. I was trapped, and I didn't know how to get out. The truth finally came out one evening when Andy went through my phone. He found messages, photos, and videos that left no room for doubt. I was in the kitchen when he confronted me, his face a mixture of anger and heartbreak. I tried to explain, to apologize, but the words felt hollow. There was no excuse for what I had done, and I knew it. Andy was devastated, and so was I. I had betrayed the man I loved, and there was no going back. The days that followed were a blur. Andy moved out, and Larry was caught in the middle. He was confused, hurt, and angry, and I didn't know how to make it right. I tried to talk to him, to explain, but he didn't want to hear it. He felt betrayed, and I couldn't blame him. I had destroyed our family, and there was no easy fix. Troy, meanwhile, was still in the picture, but things between us were strained. The guilt and shame were overwhelming, and I didn't know how to move forward. Andy filed for divorce, and I didn't fight it. I knew I had lost him, and I didn't deserve a second chance. The life we had built together was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces. I tried to focus on Larry, to be there for him, but it was hard. He was struggling with the fallout, and I didn't know how to help him. I felt like I had failed as a wife and a mother, and the weight of that failure was crushing. In the end, I was left with nothing but regret. I had risked everything for a fleeting moment of passion, and I had lost it all. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew it would be a long road to redemption. I had hurt the people I loved the most, and I would have to live with that for the rest of my life. The affair with Troy had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, but it had cost me everything. And as I looked back on the life I had destroyed, I couldn't help but wonder if it was worth it. The divorce was finalized, and Andy moved on with his life. He found someone new, someone who could give him the love and attention I couldn't. It hurt to see him happy with someone else, but I knew I had no one to blame but myself. Larry, meanwhile, was struggling to come to terms with everything. He was angry with me, and I didn't know how to fix it. I tried to be there for him, to show him that I still loved him, but the damage had been done. Troy and I tried to make things work, but it was clear that our relationship had no future. The guilt and shame were too much, and I couldn't look at him without being reminded of everything I had lost. We ended things, and I was left alone to pick up the pieces of my life. It was a painful process, but I knew it was necessary. I had to face the consequences of my actions and learn to live with the choices I had made. Over time, I started to rebuild my life. I focused on my candle business, throwing myself into my work as a way to cope. I also started therapy, trying to understand why I had made the choices I had and how to move forward. It wasn't easy, but I knew I had to do the work if I wanted to heal. Larry and I started to rebuild our relationship, slowly but surely. It took time, but eventually he forgave me, and we found a new normal. Looking back, I can see how far I've come. The affair with Troy was a dark chapter in my life, but it taught me valuable lessons about love, trust, and forgiveness. I know I can't change the past, but I can learn from it and strive to be a better person. I'll always carry the guilt of what I did, but I've also learned to forgive myself. Life is a journey, and sometimes we take wrong turns. What matters is how we find our way back. It's been 5 years since the affair, and my life looks very different now. I've rebuilt my relationship with Larry, and we're closer than ever. He's grown into a kind, compassionate young man, and I'm so proud of the person he's become. My candle business has flourished, and I've found a sense of purpose and fulfillment in my work. I've also learned to be alone, to find happiness within myself rather than seeking it in someone else. Andy and I have found a way to co-parent peacefully, and I'm grateful for that. He's happy with his new partner, and I'm genuinely happy for him. We both moved on, and though our relationship will never be the same, I'm thankful for the time we had together. As for Troy, he's moved on too. We don't talk anymore, but I wish him well. He was a part of my journey, but not my destination. I've learned a lot about myself over the past few years. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can face my mistakes and grow from them. I've also learned the importance of honesty, communication, and self-love. I'll always carry the scars of my past, but they've made me who I am today. I'm not perfect, but I'm trying to be better, and that's all anyone can do. As I look to the future, I feel a sense of hope. I know there will be challenges ahead, but I'm ready to face them. I've learned that life is messy and complicated, but it's also beautiful and full of possibilities. I'm grateful for the lessons I've learned, and I'm excited to see where the next chapter of my life will take me. I've made mistakes, but I've also found redemption. And in the end, that's all that matters.
If you like this story and felt connected, please subscribe. Thanks for watching Gabby's Cheating Stories. See you on the next one.